One of the biggest reasons why we get stuck in patterns of ancestral, karmic, emotional pain is because we don't heal from the illusion of loss. Yep, you heard me right. The illusion of loss. Because what if I told you that loss is an illusion and that the only way to heal from loss is to accept it as the illusion that it is? Well, today on the Sovereign Woman podcast, we're going to be talking about this precisely and the 5-step process for grief recovery when we do believe we are experiencing loss. Satnam, a beautiful Sovereign Woman, Satnam, and welcome back to the Sovereign Woman Movement podcast, where it is our mission to disrupt ancestral karmic patterns of emotional pain by healing our nervous systems and rewiring our brain with Kundalini Yoga therapy and A Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy. It is an honor to be back here with you on this ancestral miraculous Tuesday section of the podcast, where we're going to go deep into the spiritual psychotherapy of getting to the root causes of these patterns so they could be not only healed in our lives, but be disrupted in our lineages. So, as you know, the last week I've been sharing with you all information about the illusion of death in itself and the spiritual psychotherapy perspective of it, as well as the scientific perspective of it, or I would call it more the energetic perspective, which has to do with Kundalini Yoga therapy. And this week, I really wanted to follow up with the how to actually heal from the grief that accompanies the perception of loss or the perception, especially of death, because it's something that requires japji. So japji in Kundalini Yoga means repetition. It's repetition that we need to do. So like when you go to the gym, you have to go several times in order for your muscle to become nice and strong and powerful, right? But when it comes to like spirituality, it's like we think we just have to do it once. We think we just have to like basically pray one time or meditate when we get a chance or things of that nature, and then we expect our whole life to completely change. In fact, we give up because we're like, oh, I've been meditating and everything is the same in my life, or I've been doing the spiritual psychotherapy work of A Course in Miracles and I haven't seen any changes. But the truth is like, regardless of wherever you are in your journey of healing, like however old you are and plus all the lifetimes you've had, I mean, you're talking about a buildup of programming, and especially as it relates to the programming of illusion that you are separate from God and that there's something inherently wrong with you. And even the belief of death and loss. I mean, these are thought patterns that have been ingrained in you, whether it's through your ancestors, through society, through anything around you, that they have been engraved in you. So this is why we need japji. This is why we need repetition. And ultimately, we need to all understand that we're all climbing up this beautiful mountain, okay? We're all ascending. And ascension is literally accepting the atonement, what our brother Jesus Christ came to teach us, which was not death. He came to teach us not the crucifixion. He came to teach us the resurrection because he did not suffer in death. So he showed us and demonstrated to us the journey of enlightenment, of atonement through forgiveness, through knowing that we're always connected to with God. So he came into the physical form, just like you and I come as the daughters of God. And through the spiritual psychotherapy work he did, through meditation, because he was a great yogi, and it's been proven in the historical facts of Jesus of how he went around the world, Egypt specifically, India, to teach others how to meditate, that he himself learned to ascend, which means go up this mountain to really connect with the true reality, with the true essence of who we are. And that is why we need to not only do the spiritual psychotherapy work, which is what we do here every Tuesday on the Sovereign Woman podcast, but also we have to repeat it. We have to repeat it over and over again, because the reason that you're here is because your old thought systems are not working anymore. When I first found A Course in Miracles back in 2008, I've been a student of A Course in Miracles since 2008. I've been teaching it as a weekly class, almost daily, but weekly also, to my community for more than 4 years now. So they say, teach something in order to master it. And I can tell you that in the last 4 years, this repetition has elevated me to a place where I have been able to forgive the unforgivable. I have been able to accept death as an illusion and loss as an illusion, because ultimately the only truth is love. The only truth is what my mind is comprised of, which then creates this reality, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So in order for you to see the truth, you're going to need to heal the mind. And that is why we all need spiritual psychotherapy, especially as it relates to loss, because loss is a very tricky experience. And if you're someone that has gone through loss recently, like if you're going through the grief process, let's say that you somebody in your life died, or perhaps there's a loss in a relationship, a loss in a home, in financial, whatever that equates to, it is very difficult for you to really understand, and it might actually be very triggering for you to understand what I'm going to be share with you right now, which is why we all need preventive maintenance. I study the course every day, not just when I'm having a bad day, since 2008. Same thing with my meditation practice. I have a daily sadhana practice in our community, actually our women's community, the Sovereign Women Academy, where every single day, it doesn't matter what I did the day before, it doesn't matter what I'm going to do the day tomorrow, it doesn't matter if I'm feeling happy or if I'm feeling sad, I wake up and I start my practice of meditation at 3:45 in the morning. This is important because, again, if you are in grief, it is very difficult to try to do this work. It's almost like the preventive medicine of daily meditation, daily prayer, daily spiritual psychotherapy. What it's doing is actually preparing you, and not for bad things to happen. It's preparing you for life. It's preparing you for understanding that everybody has their own karma. They're all going to go through their own experience, and that what you can do as a beacon of light is heal yourself and project this peace so that others can, you don't have to tell them anything. They can basically be around your energy. And even when they're going through their grieving process, that in itself is what heals them, because that's how we heal others. It's not what we say, it's our presence, it's our essence, it's what we believe. And when it comes to loss, that's huge, that's crucial, because like I've shared with you, even in the podcast episode of The Illusion of Death, which you can go check that out here on my YouTube channel, I'm not saying that you're not going to have the emotions of the human experience. Like the great yogi master, who his wife died and they asked him, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "Well, because I'm sad." I'm not saying for you to deny. In fact, when I went through this last year was very interesting, because we've had more deaths in my family than we've had in like 10, 20 years, right? In my whole life. In the last year, there were 4 really serious, important deaths in my family that, I'm still processing and grieving through. So it's important for us to like honor those emotions, because that's definitely part of the grieving process. But ultimately, we want to get to the point of understanding that the only way to actually heal from grief, in order to disrupt these patterns of emotional pain, is actually by understanding that loss is an illusion, and that so is death, and that God did not create loss, and that God does not punish us through death. And again, this is why we're here, repeating this important information over and over and over again. So we're going to start today by looking at loss and looking at why it is considered an illusion, and also understanding then the specific attributes that contribute to this reality or to this truth, so that you can finally learn to climb the mountain up as high as possible to reach that 5th step, which we're going to talk about today, of the grieving journey, to be able to relinquish all the pain that does come with that experience of grieving or of death or of loss in general. So first and foremost, we have to understand that the course teaches us that loss, whether this pertains to a relationship or death, is actually an illusion. And in realizing this is the only way to actually heal from this loss, from this grief. And I know that this perspective challenges our conventional understanding of grief and bereavement, because if you look at traditional therapy and Western medicine, everywhere you Google how to heal from grief or how to move through grief, like the only thing that they focus on is accepting the reality that the person is gone, or accepting the reality of the loss. When A Course in Miracles is the complete opposite. That's why it is spiritual psychotherapy on steroids. It is, what it's teaching us is to accept the unreality of loss, accept that loss is not real. And yes, this can be done. And it is proven in many ways. Like I shared even last week with the death podcast, like when someone dies, like the perfect example of that is so much that I shared with you all in the Kundalini Yoga Therapy, a podcast episode about the yoga perspective of death and how much happens in the afterlife. Like so many things happen in the afterlife. And not just that, in near death experiences, and just in the fact that our brother Jesus Christ left his body, the body disappeared, and he was still communicating with people. And it's not just Jesus Christ. Many of us have had the experiences of speaking to people that have transitioned into their next journey, right? Like, for example, for me with my grandma or my cousin or people, my teacher who transitioned in a couple of years ago and then became a really powerful ancestor in the ethers. And they still communicate with me. And anytime I want to talk to them, I can. And the only way for me to really understand this is that I realize that they are not constrained in a body and that the body is a mechanism of a temple to be used here to spread miracles, which is love. And that's the only reason why we have the body in this consciousness. But ultimately, we are a soul having this infinite experience. So we have to learn to look at these ways conventionally we've been programmed to believe in loss, and we have to apply this psychotherapy to really understand it. And to understand that loss is an illusion, we have to understand two things. First, we have to understand what the ego is. And second, we have to understand what the true reality is. So follow with me here as I take you down the rabbit hole. So first, we have to understand what the ego is. And most people, when they hear the word ego, the ego sounds like some arrogant aspect of ourselves, but that's not true. It's not the only thing that it is. It's not like an enemy. It's not like a villain in your life. Because the ego, ultimately, what it is it's a false identity that we cling to. So the ego is what separates us from God, and it leads us to experiences of suffering and loss. Why? Well, the reason is because if you don't know who you are, which is a very important aspect of healing, which means you're holy. You are the holiest daughter of God. Yeah, you go unconscious. Yes, you make mistakes. Sin is not real. God did not create sin. God did not create death. We go unconscious. We make mistakes. Through forgiveness, we are forgiven, right? But that ultimately we're an infinite soul having this physical experience. And again, the reason why I can believe this and know this now is because of Japji, of repetition, especially since 2008. I mean, it's been a long time. So I know that I'm an infinite soul having this human experience, right? I'm in this world, but not of it. It doesn't mean that I don't honor my body. It doesn't mean that I don't honor the negative mind that teaches me not to cross the street when there's like a freeway or a car is coming at 90 miles per hour. It just means that I don't identify as just being my body, meaning we need healing of the mind because the ego loves to attach itself to identities. So when I say that you think you're a body, you give yourself all these identities to find your worth, to find your value. So I'm a mother, I'm a CEO, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter. All of those are roles that the ego clings on to give itself some kind of value, to give itself some kind of worth. The problem with these identities is that they're not infinite. For example, you're always going to be a daughter, but your parents will transition one day. What happens if you're a mother and one of your children transitions? Are you still a mother or are you not? Remember, the ego was so attached to being that mother that when there is that apparent situation of loss, that's what actually suffers. It's not your infinite soul. It's the way the ego clings onto these stories. So, like, again, when someone dies, whether it's a cousin, a grandma, a husband, whoever it is, right? And that physical person is not there, which means that your ego identity changed, right? Now you're not a wife, now you're a widow, right? And there's not even a word for parents that lose their children because it's that horrific. So believe me, my condolences to you and my all my prayers to you. I understand. But what is really suffering, and this is why we need the spiritual psychotherapy, is not your true essence, because your true essence is always connected to the divine, always connected to God. What is suffering is that ego identity, that place in you that needs that identity in order to feel worthy, in order to basically think it's gonna stay in this physical body forever, because that's another thing that the ego is scared of. It's scared of you awakening, getting to the top of the mountain, and knowing that you're not all of this identity that it's giving you. So the ego has this insane attempt to just make a real identity that is apart from God. Anything that says that you are separate from source, in order to replace this identity with the awareness of God. Because ultimately, the ego is the sign of limited and a separated self, born in a body, doomed to suffer and to end its life in death. That is what the ego is. That's what the Course teaches us. And ultimately, that is the truth. There is this aspect of your untrained, uncontrolled mind that is running amok, that creates you, that makes you a slave to your mind, that is so afraid of loss, that is so afraid of death, that it truly believes is separate from God, that suffers anytime something doesn't go its way, especially if there is some perception of loss. So we have to do the healing work, the spiritual psychotherapy work, in order to heal the mind, because the only place where healing happens is at the level of the mind. If you do not heal the mind, the body is going to get physically sick. Why? Because every disease, every physical illness starts with an emotion. And the mind was given to us when we took off the apple of knowledge, which was not a sin. Again, God didn't create sin. It was basically our opportunity. God said, okay, I want to experience myself through you. So now you take off this bite of knowledge, which means I'm going to give you a mind. So now you go on the hero's journey and train your mind so you can come back home to me and to tap into the true reality. Because in order for us to understand that illusion is that loss is an illusion, and to understand the ego, you have to understand reality. You see, we believe that what we see with our physical eyes is the reality. This is the truth, when that couldn't be farther from the truth. Because the Course proves to us that the world you are seeing is a symbol of your thoughts, and it can either represent fear or love. If you are someone that hasn't done the healing work, that doesn't have a spiritual connection with God, with the divine, then you're in a lot of fear. That's really what the big problem is right now. Number one, people don't have a relationship with God. Or number two, the relationship they have with God is filled with guilt. Like they believe that God is some man on a throne that sits with his hands crossed all day, just judging everyone. So the problem is that you are creating your reality with your beliefs, with your thoughts, with your feelings. So if you're filled with fear and you're going to say, oh, fears, I'm afraid because of the world. I'm not afraid. The fear is not inside me. That's not true. There are two people could be sitting in the same situation. Let's say that there's a lion, right? And one has learned to heal the mind and to master all animals. And the other one is deeply afraid because they've never done any mind work. Well, both of them could be sitting in the same room, and one of them could be deathly afraid and the other one might not be any afraid at all. Why is that the reason? If fear comes outside from us, because fear is not outside of you. Fear is inside of you. This means that the reality that you're experiencing is shaped by your perceptions. And that's why the Course is so powerful in healing the mind, because it heals your perceptions of what happened to you as a child, your perceptions of death, your perceptions of loss in general. So that's the only thing we can transform. We may not be able to go back to time and change what happened to us, but we can shift our perception of what happened to us. And that's crucial when it comes to loss, and also when it comes to like childhood abuse. You know, most people that go through childhood abuse, which is a very common ancestral karmic pattern that gets repeated over and over and over again. If you're someone that went through child abuse, especially when it relates to like sexual abuse, you are a child that doesn't know or can't defend themselves from a predator or from a person that is abusing you, right? So you grow up to think you're unworthy. And then when you get to become an adult, you're like, I wish I would have done this. I should have spoken up. I should have attacked. I should have, done this and that. Well, as a small child, there's no way you could have done that, right? And in fact, when it comes to abuse, there's grooming involved. There's so many psychological things that happen to the child. So the child doesn't speak up, or that the child doesn't defend themselves, right? But as an adult, all you want to do when you haven't done any healing work of your childhood traumas is like, I wish this would have happened differently. I wish I would have done this. Well, we can heal that. We can heal your perception, and we can heal your inner child to the point where the mind is healed, or when you can accept perhaps what occurred, but accept that it didn't occur because of your worthiness, or because you deserved it, or because you attracted it, or all these different things that an unhealed mind tells us. So we can absolutely shift the perception of what happened to us as children, which ultimately shifts the perception of who we are today and ultimately brings us to healing. So what we need to understand is that you are 90 to 95% of the day, you're not seeing the reality, because true reality is love. It's the only emotion that is real. In fact, in near-death experiences and spiritual masters that are able to move into the ethers, because remember I shared with you last week how there are 5 ethers that we go through in the afterlife. Well, in meditation, we can access those ethers. In Kundalini Yoga meditation, you practice the meditation, you can go to the 3rd, 4th ether, whereas all the ancestors hang out, some ancestors that are enlightened or have accepted the atonement, or who got great masters and yogis, Buddha, Jesus Christ. Like, we can do that in our physical body. We don't have to die, right? So if you heal your mind and you use these practices, technologies like Kundalini Yoga, of course, miracle spiritual psychotherapy, you're going to experience this reality as the truth, which is love. You're going to be emotionally intelligent. But the problem is that we don't do the healing work. We don't do the spiritual psychotherapy work. So what do we think? We think this reality is scary. We think the world is scary. We think that we're basically need to survive. We see reality as a place where we suffer. We see reality as a place where we're separate from God. And that's couldn't be farther from the truth. But again, if you're not receiving spiritual psychotherapy, if you're not practicing spiritual psychotherapy, you're going to think the opposite, based and especially on your trauma patterns. So for us to really understand that loss is an illusion, you have to understand whether you're operating from the ego and whether you're operating from the true reality or not. And to be able to do that, then you then must move through what is given to us as A Course in Miracles as the 5-step process to grieving, or to attaining the awareness that loss is an illusion. Because there's a difference between grieving and there's a difference between the grief recovery process. Tomorrow, I'm going to share with you both. What is grieving, but then what is the actual process to grief recovery as it relates to Kundalini Yoga. Today, I want to share with you the 5-step process to grieving from A Course in Miracles, the spiritual perspective, to be able to get to this healing atonement phase of wherever it is you are in the entire journey. So last week, I shared a little bit with you on lesson 284, which is all about loss and the illusion of loss. And in that lesson, it's like a paragraph long, there is a very distinct, easy to understand process to really accept illusion as a loss and to heal. And what that is first and foremost, we have to acknowledge the grief. We have to acknowledge the pain, acknowledge the illusion of loss, because a lot of us numb it, or we run away from it, or we pretend it's not there. Some of the people that worry me the most are the ones that are happy all the time. Like, they're just happy, 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 happy. Those people worry me because the human experience has all kinds of different emotions. And a lot of people are just putting up a facade that they are happy, and they're actually, it's almost like a defense mechanism, a protection mechanism from the brain and from the nervous system that like says you need to be happy or else there's something wrong with you. Or, you know, when people are grieving the loss of someone who died, and let's say it's been 5 years, and someone comes to you and says, you're still sad about that? You're still grieving about that? Like, shouldn't you be over it by now? That's really a sad thing to say to someone. Grieving doesn't have a timeline. You can't rush your feeling. But the problem is that if we don't understand that we need to acknowledge the pain and that we need to become aware of it, then we're going to continue to have it in our lives, because what you resist persists. So to break down this 5-step process of understanding that illusion of loss, the Course gives us this really powerful exercise. And these exercises are like meditations. And these are powerful enough that literally you can receive the miracle instantaneously, which is that shift in perception. So what this lesson says is that loss is not loss when properly perceived. Pain is impossible. There is no grief with any cause at all, and suffering of any kind is nothing but a dream. This is the truth at first to be but said and then repeated many times. So first we acknowledge the pain, and then we repeat it many times. Again, you go to the gym, you work out your muscles, you need to work them out enough to start to see the shape, right? Same thing with your spiritual practice. That's why I call this spiritual psychotherapy on steroids. You have to repeat these. You have to come to class. You have to show up as a student, because again, these are things that you have not been taught. You've been taught the complete opposite. So what the course is telling us is that you have to acknowledge, and then you have to repeat this over and over and over again. Because then what happens in the second step of the grieving journey is that after you repeat it many times, what starts to happen is you gradually start to accept this truth. Again, you came here, you've been on a journey, however old you are, however many lifetimes, where you have been listening to the voice of fear. That has been your teacher, because you haven't had training of the mind. You haven't healed your mind, right? So when the course came to me back in 2008, I remember praying to God. At that point, I was reading a book called Conversations with God. Neil Donald Walsh actually wrote that book. He went to a point where he was homeless, okay? Homeless. And when he went homeless, he started to have these conversations with God, where God was channeling to him all this information. And he wrote all these books, and these books became bestsellers internationally. I don't know if any of you have read them, but I remember specifically after I read that book that I said to God, God, I want to be able to listen to you the way my brother Neil Donald Walsh listens to you. I want to hear you. I want you to talk to me the way that you speak to Neil Donald Walsh. And when I said that to God, that is when the Course in Miracles came into my life. I'm not kidding you, almost immediately. So when I picked up A Course in Miracles in 2008, I looked at it and I opened it and I was like, this is blasphemy. This is so dumb. This is stupid. This is spiritual bypassing. This is denial. Why? Because at that point, my mind had received zero healing. So everything that it was telling me was triggering. It was the complete opposite of the fear-based thought foundation that I lived out of. Because prior to 2008, prior to my spiritual awakening, all I knew was the ego, power, separation from God, and fear. That's all I knew. But when I asked God to come speak to me and that I wanted to hear the voice of love, that's when the Course came. Then I rejected it for a few months. I literally got rid of it. I think I even gave it away to like a local, what do you call those places, like Salvation Army or one of those things. So I gave it away. And then within 2 months, somebody else started talking to me about the Course, somebody that I knew. And I was like, why are they talking to me about the Course? I literally just got rid of that. And then in weird ways, I would go to different places. Like I would go to a bookstore, I would go to a coffee shop, or I would go to my appointment. And then all of a sudden that person knew about the Course or was talking about the Course. So me even getting rid of it, it's like there were signs everywhere, just like, here's the Course, here's the Course, here's the Course. Where finally, late 2008, I was like, there's a reason this is happening. So that's when I started to really apply myself into the Course. And the Course comes in 3 different sections. There's a workbook, then it has 365 lessons that you practice one every single day. I've gone through them 3 times, almost 4 times, where I've repeated the lesson, 1 lesson per day. And there's an actual text. That's what we study inside of my women's community, Satori Vitality and Spirituality. And we study a chapter every single month. Right now we're on chapter 26. But the thing about the Course is that it doesn't matter where you start. Like for me, I could open it up to the back page. And even if I would have never read the Course before, you'll still understand what the Course is talking about. So you don't have to read it like from beginning to end. You can just do the exercises, or you can just do the workbook. But preferably you want to do like the exercises, 1 a day for 365 days. So since 2008, and then fast forward to 2023, that has been my spiritual psychotherapy. It's been the repetition of these beliefs, these thought forms that are all connected to God, connected to love. So that is why for me, I'm in a stage right now of the fifth stage of the grieving journey where when life happens to me, I can really appreciate all of the gifts and blessings around it. And I'm not in denial because I still go through the human experience. In fact, when my grandmother died, I was crying. I would repeat this lesson to myself over and over again, and I would still feel sad. I would still feel like it was like a horrible experience. You know, it wasn't something easy at all. But truth is that that is what allowed me to finally be able to do a lot of healing work for my grandma, even when she transitioned. Because after she transitioned, there was still a lot of work to be done. And if it wasn't for the course that prepared me for all of this, I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing today of helping women disrupt ancestral karmic cycles. So again, you don't want to do this work only when you're going through grief or when you're going through horrible loss. You want to be very consistent and you want to be a spiritual warrior. You want to really use these teachings as an everyday walk the talk, not just when you need them kind of situation. So the first thing is, you got to acknowledge the pain, then you got to repeat it, or gradually you start to accept this truth like me. Initially, you're going to have a lot of reservations, is what the course is saying, but progressively you're going to start to embrace this perspective more fully because like the course says, would you rather be right or would you rather be in love, at peace? Would you rather be right or would you rather be at peace? And that is a very important statement, especially when it relates to loss or when you're going through challenges with someone else, because of course you should always stand up for yourself. And there's a whole section on the course on how to set boundaries, a very powerful section on that. So I'm not saying that you should be a weakling that gets stepped over. Jesus Christ was not a weakling. He exorcised demons out of many people. What I'm saying is that you should learn to have emotional intelligence to realize that people are only acting out of their level of consciousness and pain, that it has nothing to do with your worth. And think about it, in a loss of a relationship. Let's say there's a loss in a breakup or marriage or even death, but let's just go with breakup and marriage and betrayal, things of that nature. There's some women that have joined my community who have gone through a divorce or who were going through a really bad situation in their in marriage and now have healed just like me and their marriage. And imagine if you go throughout your whole life thinking that the reason that this person betrayed you and that the reason this person left you is because of your worth, because of who you are. That's what most people do. And that's why they stay jaded. They don't trust other relationships. They don't trust God. What if instead you did the spiritual psychotherapy to understand that that person did what that person did based on their level of consciousness and their level of pain. And it had nothing to do with your worth. Yes, your emotions, your patterns are magnifying to you those experiences, but it has nothing to do with how beautiful you are or how worthy you are to receive love in your life. If you did that spiritual psychotherapy, not only would you be able to forgive that person, you would be able to forgive yourself, and you would be able to let go of all those grievances, allowing you to invite and welcome beautiful, conscious love. But we don't do that. We stay stuck in our thought patterns and we don't heal the mind and we don't become emotionally intelligent. And this is what this really is. This 5 steps process means you are emotionally intelligent. You're not in denial. You have an incredible relationship with God. You've released guilt and you've done a lot of forgiveness work, which is what I had to do since 2008 until right now. Every single day, every day is devoted to forgiveness. There are so many things in my life. I can tell you particularly 2 very painful type of traumas that I experienced in my life that I never thought I would be able to heal from. And fast forward to 2023, now I see them as blessings. Now I see these people that I used to see as Judas as my saviors. Like I can say that. I can even be in a room with these people and not be triggered. Why is that? Because it takes repetition. It takes accepting the truth. It takes repeating to yourself how there is nothing wrong with you. There has never been anything wrong with you. So as you start to move up the atonement or the awareness or enlightenment journey, this becomes a lot easier. And that's why we have to have a daily practice. So as you move from step 3, which is you accept it as but partly true, because that's what happened to me. I mean, there was a long phase where I was like, I do believe this, but I don't. I do believe this, but I don't. And I had a lot of reservations, right? Like, I feel like I'm being a pushover. Like, I feel like I need to get justice. I feel like this is not right, right? But you start to reach a point of genuine belief in the true reality that God created with you, which is love. And you start to really say, you know what? If there's no difficulty in miracles, there's no difficulty in forgiveness. And that's what it looks like to actually heal the mind, which takes you to the fourth step. Then you seriously start to consider this as true, meaning that loss is not real, that death is not real. And then you get to the fifth stage. That's when you actually accept it as the truth. When you really accept that you are beyond that experience that caused you so much pain, that you are connected to the truth of that major traumatic event that happened to you in your life literally was the portal, was the pathway to your own liberation. When you finally get to this fifth stage, you start to internalize and you start to actually live beyond this illusion of loss. That's why I say everything is healable. Look, if you've gone through a loss of someone you truly love, perhaps the death of someone you truly love, or maybe a breakup in a relationship, I get it. I understand that the pain feels palpable, that it feels real. But everything in this world is healable, and you might not be the same person you used to be before that breakup, before that loss, a parent loss. But you're going to be a much more powerful human being. I think so many people just accept the idea that after the death of someone, or after the breakup, or after an illusion of loss, that they're going to have to be depressed or sad or broken for the rest of their lives. That could not be farther from the truth. Because we have in the age of Aquarius these spiritual psychotherapy tools, these self-realization tools like Kundalini Yoga. Kundalini Yoga, you had to be a master or a guru or a yogi to even learn these teachings before 1960. So now we have access to them to crown ourselves, to be able to accept the atonement like our brother Jesus Christ, to become empowered through our situations where we once judged them as incredible trauma. And all of us can do this. It doesn't matter what it is that you've experienced as the illusion of loss, because ultimately we shift our perception. And more importantly, we change our relationship with God. Because if you're really aware of what I've just shared with you, this 5-step process to going beyond the illusion of loss and grieving, there are 2 overlapping things that the Course repeats over and over and over that we're doing as it relates to spiritual psychotherapy to understand this beyond the logical mind. And what that is the repetition over and over and over, right? Until we internalize it as a total conviction. And then the second thing is that we practice it, not just when it comes to when we're having trauma, where we're going through these horrible things, but we actually practice it every day of our life, whether that is prayer for you, whether that is meditation, whether that is picking up an actual exercise of the Course, because God just wants us to be willing. God doesn't say you have to go figure it all out. You have to do all this work. God just says, can you be willing to even accept these beliefs, these truths? Because if you say yes to that willingness, all that means is that you're showing up with meditation every day. You're showing up in prayer every day. And it doesn't mean 2.5 hours like I do. It just means you're doing it for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever that is, whatever is palpable for you. But that shows God and you that you are willing, because that's how you start to gain your trust back in God and in you. Imagine if you've been a child that's gone through a lot of trauma, loss, then you've probably learned to abandon yourself. We did a whole segment on the inner child healing here on the podcast too, if you want to go check that out. So you probably have learned to abandon yourself because everyone abandons you, right? So as you start to become an adult, what we need to do is reconnect with ourselves. We need to learn how to stop abandoning ourselves. We need to learn to heal the relationship we have with God. And that's why a big part of this is, are you going to stop believing that God created death? Do you still believe that God punishes? Do you still believe that God created sin and that God created loss? Because if you do, that's where the spiritual psychotherapy needs to come in. When you change your relationship with God, with yourself, everything changes. And that's when you heal them. That's when you can understand that loss is an illusion and that every experience in this world holds a practical value that shows you their way back home to you, shows you the way back to the fact that you are never, ever separate from God, and that you and God not only are one, but that together through that acceptance, that you can truly become a miracle worker in this world. Because the beauty of this is that once I started to get to this fifth stage of the grieving journey and start to really accept these truths as truth, that your inner energy, that peace, that trust you hold with the divine becomes healing energy for others, so that others can feel that they can feel that sensation of your release of guilt, of all those ways you haven't forgiven. That's how others feel, because as you do that for yourself, you're now giving others permission to do that as well. So repetition and reminding ourselves that loss is nothing but an illusion. And what I'll do is I'll actually post this particular exercise inside of the comments here below in my YouTube channel, so you can repeat it over and over again. I always suggest with these psychotherapy lessons to practice them for 40 days straight, 40 days straight. In our Sovereign Woman Academy, there are particular exercises from A Course in Miracles that we practice with a specific meditation that moves us through the three-phase journey of disrupting ancestral karmic patterns. So we go from awareness to vitality to integration. And in each of those phases, what is given is a specific spiritual psychotherapy exercise from A Course in Miracles that works with that phase, as well as a meditation. But each of the modules, I always recommend that you practice for a minimum of 40 days. And the reason that we want to practice them for a minimum of 40 days is because it has been proven out through science when we scan your brain in Kundalini Yoga meditators, it is after 40 days that we notice the gray area of the brain start to dissipate. We start to see the brain start to become nice and red and just luscious, instead of like a prune that's dry because of all the traumatic patterns that you've been under. This is how you truly change the subconscious mind. This is how you change the brain functionality and the nervous system functionality. So that is why it is always recommended for you to practice for 40 days. Now, this lesson particularly is so deep, and it takes you to such a different paradigm shift and perspective shift of what you're experiencing on a day-to-day experience, that is also why I would recommend that you keep this exercise, practicing it for 40 days. It's literally 2 paragraphs. It's going to take you probably 5 minutes. That's it. If you don't have 5 minutes a day to heal your mind, then you need to study or practice the meditation for at least an hour, because there is something wrong with your life. How do we not have 5 minutes a day to actually get to the root cause of all of our pain and ancestral karmic patterns of emotional distraught that we're going through? It's crazy. And I get it, because I work with a lot of women that are going through a lot of grief and a lot of trauma. And as much as they want to do the work, the thought patterns and the programming like tells them all these stories in their head that wants to prohibit them from doing the work, which is why community is so important. Accountability is so important. Having a mentor, having a coach, all of that is crucial, because let me tell you, your mind is so conniving. Your ego is so wise in its own way that it'll keep you away from the things that you're here to actually relinquish. So I'll share that lesson here below. Like I said, 40 days minimum, and share with us your journey and your experience. I want to know what's happening in your life, because let me tell you, the minute that you commit to be willing to do this exercise for 40 days, your life is going to change dramatically. And I can't wait to hear all of the beautiful miracles that you will see. Hot Chicks Dog Walking Company says, will you share this live? I came in late. I will share this live. Thanks for asking. So this live is going to be reposted in my YouTube channel, which you can find at Veronica Barragan. And it will also be found anywhere where podcasts are played. So Spotify, Apple, all those great things. You can find it later today, this afternoon. So you can check out everything we've been talking about. Thank you so much for asking that question. So you know what you got to do. We're here together in this journey. I want to thank you for being part of this community. I want to thank you for being willing by showing up. I'm excited tomorrow to share with you the grieving process journey as it relates to your nervous system, your brain, and the Kundalini Yoga perspective to actually get you to really understand what an illusion loss is and for you to heal and reach the level of atonement that you're here to reach. Thank you for you. Thank you for the hearts. Thank you for the comments. I'll be back tomorrow.